Thank you for joining me for another cold painting table tutorial. Today we're going to paint Point Break, or the Earth's strongest Avenger, Thor. We're going to paint Thor. So he's prime black. It's just a thinned down version of AK Interactive's black primer through the airbrush, and we're going to start by slapping down color onto his cloak. Now the cloak is going to be red. It is quite vibrant in the box art. I'm going to get a little bit more volumetric in my application of it. So this deep red will be the darkest red that we have. However, we will still be able to get nice total variation where shadows are going to be sitting in the next steps. And this is just kind of a preface to questions that some people in my local gaming group have had. When I'm airbrushing, I'll go chunk by chunk, looking at what would either be the most stark overspray, if I was going to get this color onto something else, or if I was going to get something onto this color, how easy would it be to fix? So those are things that I have just in mind to when I'm applying my colors. Now this is going to also be two thin coats. Second coat won't be on screen, but you get the idea. Blow dry it, make sure it's really dry, and then go on to the next step. So this next part is where we're going to get the excellent properties of airbrushing and some of the inherent properties of red to really work for our advantage. Red is one of those colors that's quite translucent, similar to white, not so much white, but similar to yellow, that folks often have a hard time applying in getting nice good transitions and or not trying to see the black underneath show through. So in this case, we're airbrushing where we want our brightest points to be in white, creating a transition from that deep red. Now, again, we're airbrushing, so things look really quick. You could easily do this with a dry brush and some glazes afterwards, but in this case, airbrush is quicker because this Thor is not going to be for my own personal collection, but for a client's collection. So, looking along the back part of the cloak, where is the light going to hit the most? Where should it be the brightest? And then we're going to hit the underside for some cool, rule of cool looking highlights where light could be hitting, but not necessarily as bright as the upper points. So because the airbrush is going to atomize the paint as we're spraying it, and airbrush paint is inherently thinner, we're going to go with Vallejo Game Color Air. This is the old formulation, not the new formulation. I don't have any cool connections with Vallejo to get testing bottles or anything like that. Over top of all the white areas, and it's going to give us a transition from brightest to darkest. How many times you go over top of the white will make it lighter or darker, because we want some of that white to show through underneath just to have a bright point. And if you want really easy ways to hit reds, this is it. Go with a dark red, zenithal with white, and then go over with red again, and you're almost gold. So now that we can call the red done, we can go work on the tunic. I did go back and base coat everything in black with the same black that we used in the primer, but in this case, from above his left shoulder, we're going to start coloring in the tunic and the boots with this is AK Interactive 3rd generation, dark sea gray. Vallejo model color would work just as well. There's not a big concern if you're going to use that line. I just find that the AK stuff requires less thinning to go through the airbrush, and it's just a bit easier to work with when we're airbrushing. Now we're going to want to start stepping up some highlights. Here we're going to add in some pastel blue into that dark sea gray progressively in order to build up our highlights. I could not tell you what the ratio here was. I was just looking at the box art, looking in the cup of the airbrush, what made sense for what I'm trying to paint and what I'm trying to get across, and then stepping up from there. We're going to keep going with this mix, just adding in more pastel blue as we need to build up those highlights, really focusing on the highest points to get some decent contrast of the tunic's folds, edges of the boots, and his pecs, the mighty pecs. And speaking of his finely defined musculature, we're going to start getting into his skin. Now, the skin, I think, is actually one of the cooler places that we can build in highlights and build an interest to the model. If you look at like Thor as a comic book character, or even the box art for this, the boots are the same color, the tunic's the same color, the bracers are the same color. There's a lot of sameness there, so we can really break up that feeling of sameness by punching up the contrast for his face and the arms, and then towards the end of the video breaking it up with his pants, like I guess the section of the leg between the boots and the tunic. So there's a couple of really good things about painting the Crisis Protocol miniatures, and it very much reminds me of painting the Parabellum Conquest of the Last Argument of Kings miniatures as well. Is that it's a bigger scale than what you'd see in GW, and massively bigger than what you saw in the last video for Malifaux, because this is a 38mm scale, and because it's a comic book, or at least based on comic books, we see overly exaggerated musculature. So, like, his arms are jacked, just like Chris Hemsworth. So, hooray! They're doing a good job there, trying to get Chris's body type into the miniature format. Now, I'm saying this is that we can really look at paint placement and where our brush strokes are ending to create a highlight that follows the musculature of the arms and of the face that we're seeing, because the model's so big. In this case, we're just taking beige red and sunny skin tone, mixing them together, building up progressive highlights, making sure that we can get some contrast, but just noting that there will be points in which we don't want to have like the darkest point next to the lightest point, because your body doesn't really work that way, and the shadows wouldn't fall that way. So for our final bright points here, we're just, again, thinking about the volume. So each, like, bicep, tricep, his forearm, his fingers, we're trying to look at each volume to apply the brightest highlight. We just mix some basic skin tone from AK Interactive into the previous mixes that we've had of beige red and sunny skin tone, just trying to create the last point of highlight. I try to get usually 3 or so colors in at minimum, and then mixes in between in order to establish some good values as we're working across. To tie everything together, we're going to use Citadel's Dark Oath Flesh, initially very thin as an overall wash, and then once that's completely dry, we're going to go back in a little bit less thin, just to the lower sections of the muscles, to add on a little extra shading. So the thin point here kind of ties everything together. The second thicker coat will just reinforce our shadows a bit more. So I definitely had some model placement issues here. Apologies for that, for being in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. But we're going to start working into all the leathery bits. Now, the box art does have the belt being the same color as the tunic, and I thought that that was all too samey, so we're going to hit all of the leather straps and pieces that we're talking about here. Ah, there we go. Good job, Cody. You fixed... Oh, did you fix your angle? You did fix the angle. Just a little bit of hair, too. We're going to go in for the belt. There's actually 2 straps on each one of the boots, with brown leather from scale 75 as a base coat here. To start highlighting our leather, we're just going to mix in some sandalwood. I had this actually already on the palette from painting other things last night, so we just, hooray for wet palettes, keeps paints alive, mix in some water. Let's get some highlights going on to all the brown leathery bits that we just did. So his belt, the straps along the boots, and then Mjolnir's leather straps as well. And we're going to go in just for one final highlight here on everything, and this is going to be our previous mix with a little bit of Pro Curls Ivory added in. Not bright ivory, just a lighter color, just to create a little bit of extra punch and pop. So as I was going across this guy, again, that sameness feel was happening. So I wanted to get some difference between the tunic, the boots, and then that leg section in between. So we're going to go in with some of Fantasy Games by Scale 75's Innsmouth Blue. Now I know it doesn't look like a lot of a difference here, but we're going to start adding in more ivory into the mix to create some highlights. And it's going to create a tonal shift away from what the tunic is. One point just to note is at one point in time here, I can't remember where, I gave a very thin wash of Black Templar over top of the tunic and boots to help tone down the blue from the pastel blue that we were adding into our highlights. And then I also blacked out the eyes, added in white, and will at some point in time just put a little dollop of Aethermantic blue into the eyes to give him glowing eyes. With everything else done and going on to our metallics, I gave everything a coat of AK Interactive Ultramatte Varnish, and now we're going to start going into all the silvery bits, so Mjolnir and then the metal plates across his chest with Gunmetal Gray from Vallejo Metal Color Series. To highlight the gunmetal gray that we just put on, we're going to use Vallejo Model Color Silver, and now the application of this is going to vary depending on what we're painting. With the discs on his chest, we are just hitting the top of the center circle, and then the outer circle will just be the top of it as well, and that follows along to the belt buckle, in which we're just going to focus the top of the T, or I guess maybe it's supposed to be Mjolnir on his belt buckle, but still, the top part would be receiving the reflection of light. It wouldn't necessarily be the bottom section. For Mjolnir itself, it depends on where we're highlighting. Sometimes we'll just put a straight stroke across, and then sometimes when we're looking at the sides of it, we may put it towards a corner to create some contrast where the light would be reflecting, and then use a voided brush blending or feathering or two brush blending, like, to just even out that transition. Because here you can see it's quite hard, but I'm going to start wiping away the paint from my brush to be able to mix it into nothingness, which would be the gunmetal gray that we already had on. The base was a quick airbrush of concrete gray, and then a wash of transparent burnt umber ink, and I thought I was done here, and then I realized that Point Break's luscious blonde hair was black, so let's paint some blonde hair. So over top of a black base coat, we are just going to paint everything orange-brown. You don't need to put this on too thick, we can put on 2 coats, it will look lovely once it's all established. Now that the orange-brown is all down, we're going to mix in some ice yellow into that orange-brown to establish our highlights. Hair is cool. Again, if you pop back to the video that I was doing for the Fenrir Beast Pack, there's a lot of light reflections that we can play with. This is way off lens. Holy smokes, Cody. But what you can do is focus on basically where the light would be reflecting on your own hair, or go read a comic book and how they paint in light reflections onto comic book characters' hair, we can replicate that here and make it really sell. The last highlight on the hair will be just ice yellow, and it's not the Fender Beastback, it's the Chibi Barbarian that we spent a lot more time on hair, because it was so prominent on that miniature when we were painting it. And then just to tie everything all together, because it does seem a little bit stark, we're going to paint in with Citadel Contrast Nazdrag Yellow. It's a fantastic color to use for blonde hair, frankly. Like, it's great. It'll tie everything together, and we can get the true Point Break feeling out of this guy. And now I can say he's actually all done. I did off camera go and paint all the notch and the trim on the belt with rich gold from Pro Acryl. It just required me to be in an awkward position for painting, and you wouldn't have been able to see anything at all because my head would have been in the way. And that's a wrap for Thor. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed the content, and I'll see you next week with another video. It'll probably be more MCP, probably an Asgardian. Thanks a lot. Have a great day. Goodbye.